Welcome to La Course on Tête, broadcasting its coverage of the 104th Giro d'Italia. I'm OJ Borg. As always, I'd like to say a hearty ciao to Peloton's Aérogramme subscribers, and thanks to our presenting sponsors, Specialized, the makers of the Tarmac SL7, the most winningest bike in the Peloton. Cue the music! As we enter the crucial climatic phase of the 2021 Giro, with a slew of mountain climbs yet to come, the steady wearing down of the favourites, that doth continue. One by one, names that were on everyone's lips, plunder when the race started, are fading from view or have dropped out. Left at the top of the classifications is one Egan Bernal, the race leader, being pursued by Simon Yates after we all spoke ill of him last time. Damiano Caruso and Alexander Vlasov, the only riders now within 2 minutes of the Colombian, although Hugh Carthy just over 2 minutes. Anyway, who is with me today? Jeremy, do your thing.
Hello, it's Jeremy Whittle here. I'm on my way to Pembrokeshire in South Wales, gladly out of the reach of this podcast.
Hello, it's Peter Cossins here. I'm very cold and damp in a misty Pyrenees.
Cold and damp. Ooh, I dream of being cold and damp. Recording this on the eve of the leg snapper of this year's race, Egan Bernal, well, he's nailed this down, hasn't he? Done deal, might as well all go home. What do you reckon, Pete?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He's looking pretty unbeatable at the moment, but I mean, as we've known for the last year or so, his big problem's been his back, and I don't know, maybe in the wet and the cold that they've got a bit at the moment, his back might start playing up again. That's going to be his biggest issue, I think.
Hang on, if he can get up the Zoncolan though, and he can get up a gravel climb, is there not maybe just a little bit of red herring around the fact that his back might be bad still?
I think you can look at that though and say, why is he's building a reservoir of time, isn't he? So that if in case it gets eroded in the final week, I don't know if they're totally secure about him physically. I mean, he got time at Campo de Felice and he got time at the Zoncolan as well. Obviously those are great opportunities. They're probably key points in the race when you can get time. But by the same token, you might look at that and think, is he desperately trying to exploit his form while he can? Is he anxious about what might happen in the final week? We don't know.
Well, we don't know, but hasn't he just been the sharpest tool out there? I mean, they haven't missed anything. They've ridden like Sky of old and Ineos Grenadiers of new. They just have missed nothing.
I think they've been on top completely as a team. Yeah, they've been completely on it, and they've come with the strongest team. There's only a couple of riders omitted from that team that you'd say should be there. I mean, they've looked head and shoulders above the others, I think. So
in that case then, so if we're looking at it like that, is he trying maybe to build a cushion, or are they just being dominant?
I think they're just kind of riding in the way that they always do when things are going well for them. They're kind of dominating the front of the bunch when they need to. They're taking time if they get in the opportunity. They're not really taking any big risks. I mean, they don't need to because they know that Bernal is the strongest man in the race, and at certain points he's going to be able to show that. At the moment, he is anyway.
So with Yates then, Yates sat, 133 back. And I did say, I was putting it out there, I'll hold my hands up, of saying maybe he's just not in the form that we all think he's in. Is Simon Yates then, is he now the only man that can beat Bernal?
I don't think so, but I think he's the most likely to beat Bernal because he's been so discreet so far for the first 2 weeks. You know, underplayed. I mean, he made this veiled comment to the first week being slightly problematic and, you know, didn't want to go into details about it, which I don't know what that meant, but whether that was illness or whether there was some problems within the team, the structure of the team or whatever. But I think he definitely looks, he looked on Zoncolan like he was very much in control of his performance. I know he couldn't go with Bernal when Bernal took that other 10 seconds or so from him. But I don't know, it's like you can see there's a bit of a levelling up going on there. Maybe Bernal, as we get towards those final mountain stages. I mean, there's still people are going on about this stage on Monday as being to Cortina d'Ampezzo as being a key stage. But I think you can look at any of those three remaining really mega mountain stages and say the same thing about those.
Yeah, I think the thing with Yates is that from what I understand, he had some kind of stomach issue in the first few days of the race, which is why he was kind of below par and just sort of hanging on whenever he could. And he seems to have got over that. The thing that's really stood out for me when he was racing at the Zoncolan was when he attacked, there's a real confidence about him when he goes away. He just kind of looks completely in control of what he's doing. He couldn't he couldn't follow up Bernal in the end, but he was the one guy that kind of troubled Bernal briefly, or at least forced him to chase. And I think we'll see more of that in the next few days.
Do you not feel about Yates, though? There's almost a touch of the Quintanas, that he looks completely in control when he's attacking and looks completely in control when he's going out the back of the bunch and losing the race. He doesn't really have a lot of facial expressions.
Maybe, but there's just something in his body language, I think, that when he's looking good, you can see that things are coming together for him. He just appears a confident rider. I mean, maybe he looks the same way when he's going out the back. I'm not so sure, but I think when we saw that the kind of the Simon Yates that we expected to see, I think, on the Zoncolan.
Yeah, and I think as well that was a little bit of a test of how he was feeling. I mean, he could have sat alongside Bernal and waited for this final week, but I think that was just a little bit of a kind of just a little bit of a prod. I mean, it's amazing to think of the Zoncolan as being a mountain where you joust over a few seconds rather than kind of over minutes. But I think they may end up being quite closely matched in these final few mountain stages.
So what did Team Bike Exchange do then? Because they're not here. I mean, they're here obviously to place well, but we've talked about this on previous podcasts where we've talked about this new young urge to win at all costs. And I don't mean that in any sense other than number one is where they want to be and they will throw everything at the wall to try and win it. What do Team Bike Exchange do, Jeremy?
I don't think he's got a strong enough team. That's the problem. I mean, you look at all of the teams in this race compared to Ineos Grenadiers, and they're all found wanting, unfortunately, which I know probably some people will think, well, that's a bit harsh, but there's just no team that collectively compares with the strength and depth that Ineos Grenadiers have got. And I say that kind of slightly wearily of the style, because I think much as Dave Brailsford was trumpeting, they were going to be a new attacking team, other than Bernal, I think it's very much about control, steamrolling the other teams into submission, not allowing anybody else much leeway apart from pointless breakaways. And that, to me, the way they're riding this race is pretty much carbon copy of Team Sky, wouldn't you say, Pete?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was interesting on the Zoncolan stage. There were two occasions where Astana went to the front of the bunch and tried to dominate, and just you looked at them and thought, why on earth are you doing this? I mean, all the Ineos riders just lined up behind them, kind of almost kicking back, because you knew that they weren't being pressured. Nobody in the bunch was really being pressured. Astana didn't whittle it down at all. They got to the point coming on to the key points on the Zoncolan where they ended up with Vlasov was completely isolated from all his teammates. So if he'd had some kind of mechanical then, he did get dropped a little bit. He had nobody with him, whereas Ineos had numbers there all the time.
I kind of felt that was unfair on Vlasov, didn't you? Because I felt it heaped so much on his shoulders on such a tough climb, and then of course they'd burnt all the matches by the time they got near the end of the stage, and he was just hung out.
We'd be moaning though if nobody was trying anything. We'd be moaning, and just if they were all just watching the Ineos train go up the road.
Well, exactly. But you'd think after a decade of being mastered by Brailsford-run teams, whether it's Team Sky or Ineos, you'd think that people like Astana would know that that's never going to work. It's just not going to be enough, And attacking on a descent, I mean, I know they got a bit of time on the descent, but it was so far from the finish, and it didn't exhaust Bernal, it didn't exhaust Ganna, it didn't achieve the aims they wanted it to. In fact, all it did was exhaust their own man.
Why then? Why were they doing it? Were they trying to animate the race, or was it bead-on swinging? And I'm trying to use bead-on in the sense that if you watched the stage the other day, I'm trying to be time agnostic here, and we saw little Victor Campenaerts hanging out, did you see that, by the way?
Do you want to rephrase that? Doing what?
What? Not exactly that. They cut to Victor Campenaerts during the stage, and let's just say he was taking a comfort break.
Yeah, well, that's not the first time that unfortunate bit of TV direction has occurred.
Is that the director just thinking, "Hey, hello, let's spice up this coverage"?
No, I think it's just that thing that they kind of like. They don't quite realise exactly what's possible when they cut to the natural break moment. But I mean, it's a bit unfortunate.
Have you ever tried doing that while on a bike?
No.
Absolutely not, no.
I put a rain cape on, though. Going downhill, fast.
Going downhill?
Fast, yeah. Done that, yeah. That was nearly a disaster.
I can't even eat a banana at the moment on my bike. I don't know what's happened to me. I used to be able to ride no-handed when I was a kid. Now, as soon as I take one hand off, I feel like I'm going to eat a wall. Now, every podcast we'll be hearing from the legendary Italian sports writer Marco Pastonesi. Here's his latest sketch from Il Giro.
I know a guy who watches every day the Giro d'Italia on TV, not only because he likes cycling, but just because he loves Italy. And views, landscapes, panorama are so beautiful, you can imagine to be there, up on the top of the Zoncolan or in the heart of Perugia, in the castle of Montalcino or in the arena of Verona. I know a guy who watches every day the Giro d'Italia on TV, not only to follow these struggles, but especially to remember those ancient fights, Bartali and Coppi, Nencini and Gaul, Pambianco and Anquetil, Gimondi and Merckx, Moser and Saronni, and he feels younger, happier. I know a guy who watches every day the Giro d'Italia on TV, considering the overall standing not from the top to the bottom, but making an upside down from the bottom to the top, celebrating the last, the poor, the domestic, the gregario, the rider who looks more like us human being. I know a guy who watches every day the Giro d'Italia on TV, supporting all the riders, the old Nibali and the young Ponomara, the big Sagan and the thin Bennett, the courageous Marengo and the talentus Evenepoel, the dreamer Peyo and the tough Moscon. Because cycling is not like football. Football divides people, cycling joins them. And that guy, it's me.
Jeremy, a little pause here for a guest. Everyone loves a guest, and we've got somebody very exciting on with us.
We have, yes. We're joined now by Ian Boswell, veteran of the European scene and, of course, the Giro d'Italia. He's a former professional with Team Sky and Katusha Alpecin and many other teams, and is now riding the gravel scene with Wahoo Frontiers, and Ian dabbles in podcasting too. So, Ian, thank you so much for joining us. We know you've packed us into a tight schedule of racing this weekend.
Yeah, no, it's great to be on. It's been a busy weekend down here in Arkansas, so it's nice to actually just sit back and kind of, do something different than run around town. I've spent more time in bike shoes than I have in regular shoes over the last couple of days, so nice to let my feet kind of thaw out a bit.
Okay, so have you been able to catch up much with the Giro, given how busy you've been?
I have been. I always, follow results and stuff, and, just the last couple of days, because I've been racing, I've, watched the highlights and, kind of tuned into what's happening, but it's been an eventful few days, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has, and it looks a pretty brutal race. I mean, I say this about the Giro every year, but it seems to get harder and harder. I don't know how it compares with kind of your experience of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Giro is such a unique race in the sense that for whatever reason, whether it's the Tour or the Vuelta, they try to make it, as dynamic and kind of, thrilling as possible but for whatever reason, the Giro always seems to, really captivate your imagination, and it always seems to the race kind of always throws these twists and turns, and it's not even maybe the course per se, but just the riders and kind of how the race always plays out. I would say it's the most unpredictable of the three Grand Tours.
Well, that's interesting, Ian. As fans, we want to see that. As a rider, do you want to see that?
Depends on what team you're on. If you're the people that come from behind, and I remember I did the Giro in 2016 when Nibali took the jersey, I think on stage 20. So he probably loved that. But I think Chavez who lost the jersey so close to the end, and Kruijswijk who crashed and lost time the day before. It's got to be, devastating, because more often than not, if you have, the leader's jersey, I guess last year's Tour was obviously an exception with Pogačar taking the jersey off of Roglic, but, we've kind of grown accustomed to, a team or a specific rider, who's kind of, clearly riding well, and their team's, got all the right, athletes in place and ready to roll, that they seem to have a pretty tight stranglehold on the race, but for whatever reason, the Giro always seems to kind of throw us for a few twists and turns. I mean, even in 2018 when, Froome took the jersey I think he was also on stage 18 or 19. You know, it seems to, for whatever reason, just bring this sense of kind of drama to the final few stages.
And what about you? Did you enjoy it?
You know, to be quite honest, I love Italy. I love traveling in Italy. I love eating it in Italy. But I never loved racing in Italy, and I can't really put a finger on. You know, I lived in France, so I understood like the roads, and you know, I understood the language better and the style of racing. And for whatever reason, whenever I was in Italy, you know, it just seemed a little bit crazy. And I think that's, you know, that's kind of what we see in the race. You know, it's just there's so many little nuances of Italian racing that, you know, it just was never quite my cup of tea. You know, I know, for example, you know, Dombrowski obviously, you know, won a stage earlier on, and he's always been more drawn to racing in Italy. Sorry about that dog. And I can't quite put my finger on it, but I just always preferred to race in France and, you know, Spain to racing in Italy. But if I had to go ride my bike somewhere and travel and eat, I would definitely go to Italy.
But surely, as now a man who gravel races, you mentioned before we started this interview that you were a race that involved gravel and single track and all sorts this weekend. Surely that craziness, the climbs, the white roads of the Giro should be right up your street.
Should be, yeah. But I guess, you know, I did the race this past weekend on a 47C tire, not on a 25 millimeter tubular pumped up to, you know, 90 psi. So I guess I love watching the Italian racing, you know, and the scenery in Italy is just so magnificent. You know, it's so diverse, and, you know, the country as a whole is just, it's gorgeous, and there's so much variety. And, you know, especially when you're traveling in the Giro or, you know, Tirreno Adriatico, it's just each region has its own feel and its own flavor. And, you know, I think of, you know, all the Grand Tours, the Giro just really shows off the country, I think, almost better than any Grand Tour.
I think the thing about it for me is that it feels like a kind of really sensual race, if that makes sense, because I think the Italians have got this great love of beauty, so they want cycling to be really beautiful and romantic. And, you know, the French and Belgians are a bit more kind of pragmatic about it. They, you know, they want to succeed, but with the Italians, it's almost, the success is nice, but it's almost how beautiful it looks and how accomplished the rider is and how much skill and panache and style the rider has.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, you know, I was speaking to a gravel racer here the other day, and they were saying how, you know, in this day and age, it's almost more about how you win than if you win. And, you know, I think we see that, you know, more so in a race like the Giro than you do in the Tour. It's really how you win the race.
So, looking at the race as it stands at the moment, going into the final week, before this kind of there's three major mountain stages towards the back end of the week. Are you looking at it and thinking there's only one outcome here, an Egan Bernal victory?
I mean, he's looking very strong in this race. And, you know, Yates has kind of bounced back. You know, he was riding so well in Tour of the Alps, and, you know, it's kind of almost the complete opposite race that he rode in, was that 2018, when, you know, he was you know, really riding well early and then kind of, you know, faded in the last couple of days. You know, I know Egan's made some kind of statements about his back, and, you know, that was kind of an underlying issue, but you saw a couple of days ago on the Strade Bianche, you know, if there was a stage that was really going to, you know, cause that to flare up, it would have been that day, and he looked phenomenally, you know, smooth and comfortable. And they have a strong team, and, you know, Ineos is obviously accustomed to how to win Grand Tour, so I think it's going to be hard to top, you know, Bernal for the overall. But that said, you know, the Giro is, you know, it really is a race that, you know, can be, you know, flipped on its head come stage, you know, coming into that final weekend. And, you know, they do finish with that final time trial. And if, you know, you look at the top five at the moment, you know, Egan's probably the best time trialer out of, you know, the top five at the moment. You know, especially when you stack him up against, you know, Yates, Caruso, Vlasov, and Carthy. You know, he's definitely got the experience, but, you know, it is an unpredictable race, and, you know, the weather doesn't look great for the coming stages. So anything can happen, and I think we've learned that over the last, you know, couple of Giros, and, you know, especially given last year's Tour, that it really does come down to the final day.
If you were de-essing Simon Yates, if you were running that team, what would you have him do over the final week?
I mean, they have to. I mean, they need to try and isolate Bernal, but then again, you know, he doesn't have an amazing kind of climbing team around him where they're going to, you know, isolate where it's Bernal and, you know, Yates kind of going mano a mano. And, you know, Bernal really with a minute 30 lead at this point, you know, really just needs to follow. And he's shown that he's strong, but they, you know, they've got Matt White in the car, who's an incredibly kind of creative director, and I'm sure he's looking at a way to win the race. Yates having won a Grand Tour before, second place is an awesome finish, but I guess that's another point to when you look at the top 5 in this race. There's not really any riders that wouldn't be happy with where they're going to finish at the moment. Let's say the race ended now, and Caruso's in third. That's a huge result for him. And you tend to see this, later in a Grand Tour, that teams, kind of assess where they're at. And, does someone like Caruso, is he happy to just maintain third place? Vlasov in fourth, and, Hugh Carthy was third in the Vuelta last year. So obviously he, wants to be on the podium, but teams tend to want to, kind of really maximize their result. And, having Caruso in third is, probably for them a result that they want to hang on to. They're probably not going to risk anything to try to move him up. But someone like Yates, I could see him being very aggressive. He wants to win another Grand Tour. He's, performed at the Giro before. He hasn't quite finished it off. So, I think just really trying to, put it to, Ineos, and really just try to have him, go mano a mano against Bernal and see if he can outride him on one of these, big climbs coming up.
I mean, of course, if he isolates him and gets a bit of time back on him, even if it's only a handful of seconds, that still sets up the final time trial nicely.
It does, yeah. And like I said, Bernal, he's, I think has he been national champion before in the time trial? He's put out some good TTs before. Not that, there's some great time trials from Colombia, but not that it's a time trial, dominant country. But it's, if he can just chip down that lead a little bit. And, Yates is also a very confident bike rider as well. He's got the ability, but they're gonna have to try something, from, I don't think a long range attack. I think it's really just going to be trying to, pick a couple key stages when, uphill finishes and try to, catch Egan off guard and really just try to really, at the end of the day, just outperform him. It's going to be hard with the team they have compared to Ineos to, try any sort of, tactical, maneuvers, unless, they have a couple riders up the road or something, and, he can bridge across, and, there's a couple of finishes that, have a climb and then a downhill to the end, and, could get a little bit of time and they can help pull him. And if Egan's isolated, then, could chip back a few seconds here and there, but I don't think he's going to take, a minute and a half on any single stage.
Last thing to ask you is, have you seen, at the end of last year's Giro d'Italia, when Teo Gegenhardt won, Dave Brailsford made a lot of statements about kind of how, he wanted his team to attack more and to take the race by the scruff of the neck more and be more kind of creative in their racing. I feel again that they're kind of slipping back into the stranglehold style of racing in this particular Giro. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's, it's hard though when you're in that leadership position. It really is a proven method. When you have someone like Egan a minute 30 up on Yates, does he really need to try and go and win more stages? Obviously he wants to get time where he can, because you never know what may happen. And I think, even on the stage on the Strada Bianca, we saw that, Egan was on the front pushing the pace, and, they are kind of racing a little bit more aggressive in a sense, but I think they find themselves, this late in the race, there's a week to go. Do you find yourself kind of just replaying what in a really a strategy that has won them, so many Grand Tours? But, the Grand Tours are obviously, Egan he's still a young rider, but you saw last year, he kind of had a void year, and, it's very seldom do you come into the last week in a relatively clear position to win a Grand Tour. And I think it's easy to kind of default to a method that's worked in the past.
Ian, fabulous insight. One last question from me. As a pro bike racer, we're seeing fans now back by the side of the road. We've seen it at the Giro, the Tifosi are back on climbs. What are your feelings on it?
It's great to see from, a sporting perspective. And to be honest, that was one of the things I didn't enjoy about the Giro, was the fans were so... I love the fans cheering, but I got a lot of pushes from the side of the road. And I just remember when I did do the Giro, I didn't appreciate the pushes, even though it feels great and you get a little boost, but I just felt like it was cheating, and even though I was oftentimes, I'd already done my job and I was just trying to get to the finish. Again, that is one of the beauties of the sport, is that fans can be, they can really engage with the riders. As a rider, especially if you're going well up a final climb and you have a crowd of people cheering for you, it's something that's very inspiring. And I think that kind of resonates with cyclists and the history of the sport. When you watch old videos of Pantani or whoever it may be up a big famous climb, with fans on the side of the road, it is iconic. So it's good to see that fans have returned. And I think after last year, having just spoken with some of my friends in the World Tour, it was definitely a strange experience to be at some of the biggest races and really be kind of riding all alone without any cheers along the side.
So if people see you in future, don't push you.
No pushers for me, please. I prefer to get there on my legs and will rather than assistance by others.
Are the passes and coals of the Giro d'Italia getting you hyped to do some climbing? Well, it turns out you don't actually need the UCI's approval to do some climbing of your own. Break the rules on the new Specialized Aethos Comp. In stock now. Learn more at specialized.com or any of your local Specialized retailers. Now, I think at this point, Jeremy and Peter, we should talk about who's having a good and who's having a bad Giro. Do you want to start good or do you want to start bad?
Let's start good.
Should we start good? Okay, I'm going to start good by saying Ubuntu. Does that mean anything to anyone?
It does. It means that we're all in this together, and certainly Qhubeka are all in it together. They're having an amazing Giro. Three wins already now, and I mean, I guess that's the thing. When one rider wins, all the others kind of think, well, if he can do it, I can do it as well.
It is. It's for me. It's reminiscent of the start of Qhubeka-Assos when they were back Dimension Data, when they started off and they had that Tour de France where they just won everything and it was all about everyone being together on the bus. There seemed like a real glow about the team, and considering no one knew if they were going to make it into this season, it is great to see them winning.
They're an odd team, aren't they? Because they've had really, really low periods, head in their hands periods where Doug Ryder, who's the general manager, has been kind of, on the verge of just walking away from the sport, I think, because of the stress of trying to keep the team going and the lack of success. And obviously that culminated in the departure of Mark Cavendish and the fallout from all of that. But they seem to have really recovered now and have got a completely new... Well, they've got the mojo back, haven't they, very much?
Yeah, you can't walk away from the sport, though, due to nominative determinism. If your surname's Doug Ryder, what else are you going to do? You do say they've had this sort of head-in-the-hands moment. Do you see this now as the future of this team? Is it just because they're plucky outsiders? What is the role of the team, Pete?
I don't know what... I mean, coming into this Giro, they just looked like they were just going to get a good kicking, to be honest. I mean, they'd not had a great year. They're kind of short of wins. And somehow, I mean, they've had one or two moments. We saw Michael Gogol have a really fantastic ride in Strade Bianche, which maybe kind of fired them up. But they didn't really, apart from Giacomo Nizzolo, the Italian sprinter, they didn't really have a rider who thought somebody was going to get a lot of wins for them. But it's just come together. I mean, we saw this unknown Swiss guy, Mauro Schmidt, win on the Strade Bianche, just a sensational ride. And then we saw Nizzolo, after all these second and third places, win a fantastic sprint. And it was a really, really judged his effort perfectly. And then on Sunday's stage, we saw Victor Campenaerts almost looked like he'd blown it coming into the finish when he was in this head-to-head with Alpecin Fenix's Riesebeck, and almost looked like... But somehow... he kind of turned his time trialing talent into a bit of a sprint and came through. But I mean, that was a really good stage, and you kind of watching Campenaerts there, and you thought that he just seemed very confident. And the whole team seemed confident. They had three riders in the break. I mean, it was just astonishing.
Wait, he's too nice. It's strong as an ox, and it was great to see him win because he is the sort of rider who has done so much for other people because he just looks like he's having a great time all the time. So it's lovely to see him win.
I'm just laughing because Victor Campenaerts reminds me of when I first started going cycling and first started learning about cycling. He reminds me of one of those kind of like blokes who'd ride, 300 kilometres in a day with saddlebags on and a pair of jeans and just keep going into the headwind with gurning, with this fixed expression on his face. and just say, "Oh, that was brilliant. That was brilliant." And you just think, I mean, strong as an ox.
Wait, he's too nice. It's strong as an ox, and it was great to see him win because he is the sort of rider who has done so much for other people because he just looks like he's having a great time all the time. So it's lovely to see him win.
He's a bit of a bull in a china shop, though, sometimes, don't you think? I mean, sometimes he's kind of like...
Again, like you when you started riding a bike.
Yeah, absolutely. All power and no panache. But no, he just feels like he's going to kind of like... I don't know, sometimes you kind of look at him and you think, oh, you're going to go down any second. And every now and then he does. But, I mean, he's obviously so strong and such... I don't know, he's the kind of guy who gets knocked down and he gets back up again, every single time.
All right, stop referencing Chumbawamba. But when you finally do get that neck tattoo, can you please get all power, no panache tattooed?
Tramp stamp.
It'd be well up for me. Do you want to do another positive maybe? Yeah, let's do that then. Lorenzo Fortunato of the EOLO. What is it? How do you pronounce the team? Because they're a new... Is it EOLO? Okay, you don't say EOLO. Okay, EOLO Qhubeka cycling team. Their maiden win. A bit about the team. Pete, do you know much about the team? But it was lovely to see them win anyway.
Yeah, they developed out of the team that Alberto Contador set up through his foundation that kind of... was set up to raise money for research into brain injuries, like the one that he suffered when he was a young pro, and it's developed. It became an under-23 team. This year they've stepped up again. They've got sponsorship from this Italian company, this internet company, Aiolo. It's basically run by Alberto's brother, Fran Contador, who was his manager for many years, or probably still is his manager. And they've got Ivan Basso as their kind of team manager, director sportif. And I think Jesus Hernandez is the other DS as well, who is Contador's kind of very long-term domestique lieutenant. And they're kind of young riders. I mean, they've got some experienced riders, but they kind of came here. There was a bit of controversy about their selection as a wildcard pick, but it wasn't really a surprise because Aiolo are one of the big sponsors of the Giro. So... getting their team into the race wasn't a surprise in the end, but they've done really well. I mean, they've had guys in the break pretty much every day, and Fortunato's ride on the Zoncolan was absolutely superb.
And now Contador's, I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things like I'll eat my pants if we win a stage kind of thing. Hasn't he got? Is he going to do this ride from Madrid to Milan in time for the finish?
Oh, is that what he said then? If we win a stage, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, but I don't know if he really said it or if somebody kind of like said, "Oh, will you?" And he just laughed it off. But anyway, that's what he's doing because there was a whole lot of stuff on social media after the stage finish on Saturday about people mapping out his ride and suggesting what the stages would be to get him to Milan in time.
I'd love to see it. I'd absolutely love to see it. Well, well done to Fortunato for that win, and well done to Aiolo Cometa, the cycling team. Let's do the bad then, shall we? And let's start with a bit of Belgian bias, possibly, and that's De Koninck Quickstep, who came into this race with Renko Evenepoel, despite his long layoff from his crash last year, despite it being his first Giro d'Italia, talking up his chances of winning at the expense of João Almeida, who was one of the revelations of last year's Giro and finished fourth overall in 2020. So go on then, Jeremy. Did they get it wrong? I
think so, yeah. Because I think that as this race is going on, we're going to see Evenepoel sliding away and Almeida improving. I mean, he's still way down the classification now, partly because he's waited for Evenepoel 2 or 3 times now, I suppose, which has probably cost him a couple of minutes. But maybe he wouldn't have been near the top of the tree. But nonetheless, he definitely looks like he's the rider who's coming into form towards the end of the Giro, which is what you want, rather than Evenepoel, who was good in the first week and then has just not fallen off a cliff, but he's definitely fading. And it's clearly, much more than he's used to dealing with in terms of the resilience and the durability that's required to succeed in the Giro as well. So I kind of feel they got it wrong. I guess they probably think, well, it's fine because in Belgium, he's an absolute hero and the Belgian media have been all across it the whole time. So from the point of view of exposure for the sponsors, they're probably happy.
You see, I sort of don't have a problem with it. And the reason is, I think cycling needs more national teams, riders who ride for a team from that country. I like that. I think it's a way of getting people excited about a team. I think it's a way of getting people interested in cycling.
I agree with that. I think, I mean, we've seen that obviously with Ineos in a big way, and people getting behind Geraint Thomas and Chris Froome and Bradley. And I mean, certainly De Koenig have done massively well out of having Remco on the team, and the Belgian press has just flocked to the Giro. They've all been thinking that he's going to win, and I just get the impression that everybody's just got a bit carried away. Really, I mean, he's been so sensational during his short pro career. He's looked like he's capable of anything, and I just think he kind of came to this race thinking, well, if things go well for me, but I mean, it got to about stage 10, and he and Bernal were kind of closing in on the pink jersey. And he was talking about, well, one of us is going to get it. And he was obviously thinking about winning the race. And then we saw him starting to slip on the Strade Bianchi, thinking, oh, maybe it's just the white roads. And he was struggling to cope because it was quite a technical test that day. And then on the mountains, he started to struggle on the Zoncolan. And it's just coming back after a 9-month layoff and going straight into a race like the Giro and trying to race against Egan Bernal, who's obviously right at the top of his form, it just seems crazy now.
Yeah, and I think he's done really well in those circumstances. You know, he's been.
I think he has.
There. Yeah. And I mean, I think if he gets a top 10 finish, I think that will be a really fantastic result for him. But at the same time, it's kind of like, you know, there was a lot of slagging of Almeida because he supposedly didn't wait on the Strade Bianchi stage, and then also a couple of other times he wasn't supposedly devoting himself totally to Evenepoel's chances. And in some ways I thought, well, that's the wrong way of looking at it. Obviously, if the DS orders you, then you have to do it. But nonetheless, I'm quite surprised by how everybody just went, you know, through the kitchen sink at the idea that Evenepoel could just come back and win the Giro straight off the bat. Is it
naivety by De Koenig Quick-Step, do you think? I mean, we don't normally think of them as a GC team.
No, they're not naive in any way. I mean, they're a kind of hardened, you know, battle-scarred monster juggernaut of a team.
What was the last GC they won, though? What was the last Grand Tour they won as a GC?
Well, no, that's a good point. I mean, they haven't succeeded in Grand Tours. So, but at the same time, you know, they had Alaphilippe in the yellow jersey, didn't they? That was the last big success they had in the Grand Tour, I guess.
That's interesting then when you talk about Alaphilippe. So they had a French rider in a French Grand Tour. Obviously, they got a ton of press off the back of it. It was very successful. Everyone was very happy with it. Do you think that's what maybe made them take a Belgian rider to the Giro? I mean, my logic doesn't totally follow there, but I'm going to go with it. Well,
I think you might have a point there, OJ, because apparently Alaphilippe was really, really keen to ride the Giro this year because his girlfriend Marianne Rousse, who's a ex-rider, and she's a TV commentator on French TV, French cycling. She's pregnant. She's having a baby. I think at the end of July, just after the Tour de France happens, around that time, and he wanted to be with her at that moment. So he didn't want to ride the Tour. He was kind of, this is obviously a few months ago they were talking about this. And from what I've read, Patrick Lefevre, the De Koenig team boss, said no, you've got to ride the Tour. That's it. That's what we've got you in there for. And so he kind of lined Evenepoel up for the Giro. And so I don't know. I mean, maybe it could have worked quite differently if they got Alaphilippe riding this race and given Evenepoel a bit more time and brought him into the Tour. I don't know, but I mean, I think that there is an issue there with De Koenig historically having problems in Grand Tours and kind of usually presenting high expectations and then just not fulfilling them at all.
Well, this has been on our topics to talk about for every podcast pretty much so far we've done in this Giro d'Italia, because they are a cycling super team. And even earlier on in this podcast, Jeremy, you mentioned there is no team that has the strength in depth to match the Ineos Grenadiers. Jumbo-Visma do, but they've done pretty much nothing else, trying to find out where their top place rider is. And it is Foss, who's down in 10th.
As I was saying, I mean, you know, a few weeks ago, Primož Roglič dominated the Tour of the Basque Country. I mean, they controlled Paris until he had that, you know, mishap on the final stage. Now they seem kind of like pretty aimless and anonymous. George Bennett's getting in all these breaks, but he hasn't been able to clinch a stage yet. Dylan Groenewegen, who, if you remember at the start of the Giro, was the talk of the town, he's abandoned and gone home. And Jos van Enden was a victim of the crash on Sunday as well. So they're slowly wilting in the in this Giro d'Italia, and they haven't left a mark on the race yet, and I don't see them doing anything really. It makes me feel like that they are maybe just a one-horse team. You can't say that about Ineos because they've got Bernal, Thomas, Carapaz, etc., Sivakov.
I think the interesting thing about Jumbo-Visma is I think they've been really obviously been badly affected by Tom Dumoulin leaving the team. It was very unexpected. Maybe in the background they had some idea about it, but it kind of left them in a position where they weren't able to fill this massive gap in their team. I mean, obviously they've got Wout van Aert who's focusing on the Tour. They've got Primož Roglic who's focusing on the Tour. They've got all the domestiques that are ready to go for that race, and they have a super strong team there. But they don't have the depth that Ineos have, and maybe that's down to budget. But I think the lack of Dumoulin probably makes a big difference. He kind of leaves them with George Bennett was given the chance to lead, but he's just been he's really struggled. I mean, he fell away in the first few days, and he's been trying to get into breaks. I mean, I really thought he would be the guy to win on the Zoncolan, but when it came to it, again, he just slipped away.
Important question here, most important question of all of it. Jumbo or Yumbo?
I think it's Jumbo, yeah.
So on Wednesday, after the second rest day, we enter the final mountain stages of this year's race. There are still lots of classified climbs to come and a final time trial, let's not forget about that. Stages 17, 19 and 20, all mountaintop finishes and all involve brutal final climbs. I said brutal. Pistol whip me someone. Will it still be close before that final? Will it still be close before that final 30-kilometre time trial in Milano, or will the fat lady from La Scala already be drinking at the after party when they roll down the start ramp in the Piazza Aldo Moro? What do you reckon, Jez?
I think it feels like it's a done deal, doesn't it? But we felt that about the Giro many times before, and then we felt that when the Froome won. We felt 2016, I think it was, when Nibali attacked Kruijswijk on that descent, and Kruijswijk ended up in the snowdrifts. We've thought it before with kind of other Grand Tours as well. We thought it last year with the Tour de France, with Primož Roglic and Tadej Pogačar. So who knows? I don't think either Bernal is going to win this at a canter, or he's going to have problems in one of these final stages. And it's just that thing because he was really quite broken by his experience in last year's Tour. And I don't know if people remember seeing the interviews on TV, but I was standing there listening to him at the barriers when he was kind of talking about how much pain he was in with his back. And I think he's still quite fragile. He's having a great Giro so far, but I'm not totally convinced that the 3 weeks are in there, in the tank yet.
I think you're falling for the hype. Honestly, I mean, this is me switching over the course of a week by saying last week I thought he was a bit of a one-trick pony, or at least positing that. But yeah, I think they just look too strong. Pete, do you think there's more to happen?
That the problem for Bernal is his back, but he looks like we said earlier. If he can ride at the Zoncolan and ride so well on the white roads, then it looks like his back's okay. And I just think with Bernal, ever since he came through, like at the 2018 Tour when we first saw him riding there, that Geraint Thomas won, and he was just so phenomenal on so many of the stages there. He just looks like the complete Grand Tour rider, and I know he struggled last year, but I think he's going to cruise through this last week. And I guess in the back of my mind, I'm thinking it would have been absolutely wonderful if we'd seen him against Pogačar at the Tour de France. That really would have been some duel, but I guess it won't be too far away before we do.
No, it's definitely happened. Now, before this race began, we talked podium predictions. Let's revisit what we all said. Did you switch from Mikel Landa, Pete? Because that was your original prediction.
I didn't get the chance, I don't think. Can I switch to Egan Bernal?
Absolutely not. Although
no, that's not on. You can't switch.
That's not the right, on a very British level, that's not the right switch right now. You can do, actually, because none of us have tipped Egan Bernal to win this. None of us did. None of us tipped him. Jeremy went for Simon Yates, sitting very nicely, 133. How are you feeling about that tip?
Well, my podium was, if you remember, because you refused to contemplate podiums.
There's no such thing as a
I'm
first.
going to talk over you here until you stop. My podium was Yates, Vlasov, Almeida. So I'm still feeling like I could get two of those right.
Yeah, all right then. Almeida, you think Almeida's coming back? Yeah.
No, 2 out of 3, Yates and Vlasov, okay. I think could get on the podium.
All right, well, Simon Yates 133 down. My shout was Hugh Carthy, who I don't think's out of it. 211 down. There's still time.
I think there is an opportunity for him, but he's going to have to put in a steaming ride on one of his mountain stages to get near that.
I hope he rolls the dice. I just think this with EF Education Nippo, I think they're the sort of team that could do something, that have it in them to do something wonderful. So we'll see. Anyway, many thanks as always to Jeremy and Pete. If you like mountains, you're in for a treat this week, but prepared for wild weather too, as some forecasts suggest some pretty volatile conditions. For more insight into this year's Giro and bike racing in all its forms, why not subscribe to this podcast where we have a slew of other episodes, as well as checking out lecourseontête.com for more in-depth written coverage. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Specialized. Until next time, ciao, Jeremy.
Ciao, OJ.
Ciao, Betta.
Ciao.
And ciao to you. Play the music.
Via, via, vieni via di qui. Niente più ti lega a questi luoghi. Neanche questi fiori azzurri, via, via, neanche questo tempo.